Okay, welcome everybody to the Bay Area Council, to our historic Klamath headquarters here at Pier 9. Little housekeeping items first. We have restrooms down the hallway on the left, if anyone needs those facilities. And afterwards, hope you stick around for a minute or two and enjoy what looks to be like some great weather today. So really excited to have a very esteemed panel talking about a subject that was on everybody's minds a year ago today, heading into the 2022-23 water year, just prior to that record water year, smashing all records and pulling California mostly out of the drought. And it just goes to show at how volatile our system is. But before we begin and we do introductions, I think it would be really appropriate that we take a moment of silence in recognition of the loss today of a leader particularly important to San Francisco, but also to all of California and the United States, a woman who played and had an especially large impact in shaping California water policy over the past 20 years, with whom we had the great honor of working with on many initiatives. So without further ado, join me for a moment of silence in memory of the Honorable late Senator Dianne Feinstein. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So now I'd like to do some introductions. So everyone has a microphone, make sure it's turned on, and we'll just go through quickly. Introduce yourself and your company and your role. Start with Paula.
Good. All right, great. Good morning, everyone. I was going to say afternoon, but it's still morning technically. My name is Paula Kehoe, and I'm the Director of Water Resources at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and I'm happy to be here today.
My name is Tartakovsky. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Epic Cleantec. I previously worked in federal politics, and my very first job ever in politics was as an intern for Senator Feinstein. I was a letter opener, and then I ran the auto pen machine, which means for those of you who've ever received a signature from an elected official, sometimes it's signed by them, oftentimes it was signed by me. That's my special distinction.
There we go. Good morning. Will Hewes. I lead the Global Water Sustainability Program for Amazon Web Services.
Thank you all for coming today. And Aaron, I believe that means I probably have your signature in a few documents here.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So we're talking about water, we're talking about drought, and we're talking about innovation. Why don't we just start off with a real softball here to set the stage here for the audience members here in the room and folks who will be listening to this later recorded. Tell me a little bit about why water sustainability is important specifically for each of your organizations. Paula, want to start?
Okay, I'll go again. First, so the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission provides water to 2.7 million people in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's all of San Francisco, as well as we wholesale water to 27 agencies outside of San Francisco. All of San Mateo County, portions of Alameda County, and portions of Santa Clara County. So certainly water and the ability to reliably and sustainably provide water is extremely important to us. And we face a number of challenges in order to do our job and continue to do our job well. Droughts, which obviously we're talking about today, we think about droughts all the time, whether it's raining or not. Drought is always on our mind. We also have challenges with extreme wet weather events, population growth, and certainly with regulatory changes. But with that, we really have a mind and all of our work towards sustainability and sustainable water supplies by continuing to implement conservation, as well as developing new innovative ways to conserve and reuse and recycle our water, as well as augment our water supplies with new alternative water supplies.
Why is water important? Well, I should have mentioned Epic Cleantec is a water technology company. So water is what we do. We got our start actually out of work with the, that's all normal what we're doing? Okay, just making
Very
sure.
normal.
This is my first panel on a boat. So we got our start out of work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So if anyone has ever seen the videos of Bill Gates drinking treated wastewater on Jimmy Fallon, that's where we got our start. And we kind of started from a very macro trend of looking around the world, seeing that there are billions of people worldwide without access to clean water and reliable sanitation. When we look at the combined threats of aging infrastructure, urban population growth, 70% of the world's population living in cities by 2050, and then layer on top of that climate change, which is just making all the extremes more extreme, we need to do things differently when it comes to how we manage our water supplies. It's, as I often explain to my nieces, we have a finite supply of water on this planet. We have the same water we had 100 million years ago when the dinosaurs were roaming, but we have more demand. So it's a pure supply and demand issue with a lot of other complexities weaved in. So really it's just, we are at a crossroads right now where we have to do things differently. The status quo is no longer sustainable. Those are all the reasons why water is important to me. And I'll talk about my journey into water maybe later, a little bit untraditional, but I think that's actually part of the secret sauce. People who don't know water now getting involved with water.
So Amazon Web Services is the most mature and widely adopted cloud service provider globally. And the infrastructure that supports that cloud are data centers around the world. And we use water for cooling a lot of those data centers. That's kind of why, the basic piece of why we care about water. We use water because it helps us dramatically reduce our energy consumption in running those data centers. And it helps us meet our other sustainability goals like 100% renewable energy and our net zero carbon commitment. But we also have to be really sure that we're using water in a responsible way. And so at the end of last year, we announced a new commitment, a third pillar of our sustainability commitments, and that was to be water positive by 2030. That means that we're going to be returning more water than we use in our data center operations to the communities where we operate. And that really, it gives us a lens to make sure that we're managing all of these energy and water resources together in a sustainable manner to minimize our impacts. And so, it really starts with while we use water for cooling in a lot of our places, it starts with a careful analysis of whether that's the right decision in that community. So in certain places, we have data centers in Cape Town, South Africa. A lot of us probably saw the headlines a number of years ago, back in 2018. There was a risk that they would be turning off the taps or be not water to distribute to households. That's not a place where we're going to use water for cooling a data center. So it starts with that really careful analysis of, is this the right way to manage a data center in that place? Where it's not the right thing for the business, for the community, then we make sure that we use other technologies to cool data centers. But then where we are using water, we're investing in maximizing our efficiency, in using sustainable water sources like recycled water, reusing that water as many times as possible, and also investing in projects in the communities to support long-term water sustainability. So that could be expanding water access, where in places like India and Indonesia, it could involve restoring watersheds in work we're doing in California to help recharge groundwater. It can also involve helping water utilities reduce leakage in their systems, so more of the available water can go to end users. All of that together is going to help us meet the goal of returning more water to communities than we use. And it's a pillar along with those other sustainability goals of how we operate our data center infrastructure globally.
Thank you, Will. Great answer. Great answers from all the panelists. And I think what you touched on with the nexus between water and energy use, we'll get into that in a few minutes. But one thing I wanted to kind of open this up with a kind of a provocative question and ask, have we already innovated our way out of drought? And Joel, do we have that an image? Rufus, do we have this image? Okay, well, I'll describe it. Basically, it's a graph from the Public Policy Institute of California, and it shows that water use in California total peaks around 1995, and we've been declining since then. It declined until about 2016, and it's basically leveled out since then. And in that time, California's economy doubled. We added 10 million people. And then during the previous extreme drought, 2012 and 2016, worst drought in over 1,000 years, the economy in California grew at a pace outpacing the US economy, about 3.6% during that time. We added about 1 million people. The LAO said that the drought had no significant impacts on employment or revenues. So what, for the layperson, you know, that you stand back and you hear the severe warnings about drought impacts, and yet our economy seems to be, today at least, remarkably resilient to droughts. So can you help maybe take some credit for what's already happened, and what kind of risk do we still have in the future? Whoever wants to take it first.
I think we've made a lot of progress. I think there's also a lot more that we can do. You know, the industry is a relatively small part of overall water use, and the data center part of that is even smaller. And then our proportion as AWS is, you know, yet a smaller chunk of that. And we're super water efficient in how we operate our data centers. The key metric for data center water use is the number of liters of water you use per kilowatt hour of energy. And we're at 0.19 liter per kilowatt hour. That's compared to an industry average of about 1.8 liters. So it's about 10% of the water use of the industry average. But we still find little things we can do every day. We're using real-time data to continue to identify where there are leaks happening. And there's a whole bunch of things that we're doing every day to continue. Now, again, that's a relatively small percentage of the overall. But I think there's similar things in you know, the water utility sector, in agriculture, where we've made some gains, but there's still a ton of room for innovation. And water utilities have to be really careful about introducing new technology, because fundamentally, it's their responsibility to provide safe and clean water to people. And so there's a natural conservatism, which has to be there. But at the same time, we need to keep pushing innovation. But it's just really, there's a huge variety. There are certain water utilities that have reduced their leakage rates down to 5%, 10%. There are others that are still losing 30 or 40% of the water available to them. And so great progress. I think we've bent that curve a lot in terms of those impacts. And I think there's a lot more that we can do, a lot more that we have to do, because we've seen some extreme drought, but we know that that's going to be more of the norm rather than the exception going forward.
I mean, I agree with everything Will said. I think innovation is an interesting word. We hear it bandied around a lot, especially here in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. But I see innovation when it comes to water or any type of highly regulated industry hitting on 3 points. One is obviously technology. Two is around regulations that permit new technologies, new ways of doing things. And then the third is around business models and business model innovation. And a lot of what I'm talking about is borrowed from the energy industry. The growth, we saw that a lot of the growth of things like solar, hydro, wind power, a lot of those were enabled by technology, business models, and regulation. When it comes to water, I'm a big believer, and this is true for water and I think climate technologies in general. We have the technologies available today to solve a lot of our biggest problems. You know, when it comes to something like what we do as a company with water recycling, I often reference my father. My father is also my co-founder. My father was trained in the Soviet aerospace program, literally designing rocket engines. And as he often says in his very thickly accented Russian, which I'm not going to do today to spare him, but as he often says, you know, what do you think the astronauts have been drinking for the last decades? We have these technologies. It's about deploying them. So have we innovated our way out of the drought, or from drought to drought? No, not yet. But I think we're making a lot of very important strides. And I mean, I think to your point, you know, we still saw economic growth, which is great. But I think when you look at the situation with water, I think we here in San Francisco maybe have a different view than other parts of the state. And I think when we turn on our taps, water comes out. But I think in other parts of the state, in the Central Valley with our farmers, that wasn't the case. And so I think our perspective here is maybe a little bit more tunnel vision than what a lot of other folks in the state, in this country, have faced. I mean, look at Phoenix, Arizona, where they actually were blocking new real estate development because of water supplies. So we're making a lot of great strides. I think we can do a lot more, but I'm also a big believer in the fact that a lot of the solutions we have today, we have them. We just need to deploy them faster.
So we've made a lot of progress in terms of reducing water consumption. I just want to go back in history a little bit. The San Francisco PUC during the 87-92 drought, which was a long time ago for us, but that really was a significant drought that really transformed how we looked at how we manage our water supplies. And that was, we need to use water as efficiently as possible. So for the past 30 plus years, we have significantly invested in water use efficiency and conservation programming. That's not just something we do. We also need our community to participate in those kinds of activities, installing efficient toilets in their homes or changing out fixtures at offices and industrial facilities, and people have embraced that. I mean, I believe that people in San Francisco and California have accepted conservation as a way of life, which is really, again, a great accomplishment between both our community and the utility, and it's a partnership. Today, our residential per capita is 42 gallons per person per day. That's among the lowest in the state of California. And we talk about, can we do more? Can we innovate? Yes, we can. And we do see and we do expect those numbers to even decrease even further, down to 38, 36 gallons per person per day. So we're proposing that. We see that. And we know that can be accomplished through new innovative technologies. And we can talk about new programming that we've done. But it's also governance. I think you touched on that, having enabling policies. And that's what San Francisco PUC has really done a good job doing, is creating an enabling environment to allow innovation to happen in San Francisco, and to partner with the private sector to encourage water use efficiency, water recycling activities. But so I remain optimistic, and I think that optimism is also a reflection on community participation and community engagement and understanding the value of water in California and in San Francisco.
So maybe we haven't yet innovated our way out of drought, but for the past 20 years, we've been finding enough waste to cut to mitigate drought impacts. But pretty soon we're bumping up to the limits on those opportunities, and we're going to really need to bear down on innovation. Would you think that is a fair assessment of where we're at now? Anyone?
So, I mean, again, from my perspective, yeah, I mean, I think we're going to need to make some big changes in terms of how we do things. And it's not about today. It's about ensuring that we will have enough water supplies, that our infrastructure will hold up, not just for today, but for generations to come. I think a lot of the decisions that we're making now are going to have ramifications, not just now and for the coming years, but for hopefully, you know, by the time I have grandchildren, a lot of these decisions that we're making now, because I think if we continue on the current path, I think we're going to continue to experience some serious problems.
Then in that case, let's just go straight into solutions. What are the technological solutions that you're most excited about? How are you taking advantage of them? And what barriers are you encountering along the way? And we can start, why don't we start with Will and come back this way?
Sure. So it depends on what sector of the economy you're talking about. But I think broadly, there are a lot of cloud-based tools that have a ton of potential for helping to optimize any systems across the different sectors of the economy. So we're certainly using cloud-based tools that are hosted on AWS to, as I mentioned before, track our water use within our data centers in real time. And then we compare that to a model of how much we should be using based on the type of cooling system and the weather. And if we're ever above what we think we should be using, then we cut a ticket to the operators and say there could be a problem here. We need to go check it out. That's the type of alarming and real-time monitoring that can continue to drive out waste within those systems. Now that's really specific to the data center industry, but I think it has broader applications. The other type of tools that we're using, as I mentioned, you know, we get to that water positive goal both by working within our data centers, but also by supporting projects within the communities. And one of the things that we're really excited about is working with technology companies, cloud technology companies that can help water utilities similarly identify where they might have leakage in their systems. And they can then optimize their programs. There's never enough money to fix all the leaky pipes, right? We have old systems, there's always going to be leaks. But if we can spend that money better and make sure that we're really repairing the ones that have to be repaired, they're losing the most water, not digging up the ones that maybe still have some useful life in them, we can continue to drive down that non-revenue water or water leakage. And so in some places, we're actually, the water utilities are supplying us, we're saying, we're going to pay to give you this technology so that you can then go identify where there's inefficiencies in your system and make sure that you're spending every dollar as efficiently as possible. So there's, I think, a few opportunities for these cloud-based tools that can really help us make the most of the water resources we have available.
I mean, I may be biased because this is what our company does, but I'm a big proponent of water reuse. I'll take an example of what we do as a company, which is work in buildings. Buildings globally use 14% of all potable water. Almost no buildings reuse that water. So what we can do is we can take things that we refer to as wastewater, which being a marketing professional, I think is a term that is in dire need of a rebrand, because wastewater is not waste. Wastewater is water, it is nutrients, it's carbon, it's energy, all these things we can capture and repurpose. So what's actually happening here in San Francisco, I'm probably going to be stealing some of Paula's notes here, but San Francisco is the first city in the nation to actually require that all new large buildings incorporate on-site water reuse systems, meaning we are taking water from showers, from laundry, from dishwashers, from toilets, treating that water and reusing it for non-potable applications. And by doing that, we can actually reuse up to 95% of a building's water. Now, why is that significant? That means if you have a big building in San Francisco that's recycling 5 million gallons a year, that is 5 million gallons of less of pristine Hetch Hetchy drinking water that we are not using for non-potable applications that don't require pristine Hetch Hetchy drinking water. And the reason why I'm so excited about what's happening here in San Francisco is that this has now set up a template, a framework that other cities, other states, and other countries are now looking at bringing back. I mean, just in the last year, we've hosted delegations from around the country, from around the world. So I'm very excited about water reuse and the potential. And then the other piece, and I think this goes to Will's point, is just smart, what we call smart water. I mean, right now, driving over here, I had a driverless vehicle in front of me and behind me, which is still mind-boggling that we have driverless cars on the streets. I can pull out my phone, see exactly where my dog is, and my app actually tells me how often my dog is drinking, eating, and scratching. I mean, we have extremely smart technologies available to us today, but the water industry is still kind of governed by what I like to call the clipboard army of people who are going and reading a water meter, writing it down on a piece of paper and reporting it back. There's so much more we can do with the technologies available to us today, technologies like AWS and everything they enable, to just make this industry smarter. And right now, I mean, we're operating 4 water recycling systems in high rises in San Francisco. I can control every valve, every pump. I can see every single sensor from my smartphone. So if I really wanted to mess with my operators right now, I could start just pushing some buttons and messing with them, but we're not going to do that here. But I think water reuse, smart technologies, it's just a really exciting time in water.
And yes, thank you for bringing those topics up, because the San Francisco PUC, we have all of our customers are on automated meter infrastructure. So you actually have a smart water meter, over 165,000 accounts. We moved away from manual reads and pieces of paper to actually the 21st century. So with that technology, we're able to also communicate with our customers if they have a leak in their home, for example. So we monitor their data. If they have continuous use, for example, over 3 days, most likely they have a leak in their home. And so we have a whole leak detection program that we're able to communicate via email, text, letter, phone call to our customers. And through that whole program, we've been able to save a significant amount of water. Most of those leaks are from toilets. We love to talk about toilets and water. 30% of your water use basically in your home is your toilet. So we do talk a lot about toilets, and we love toilets. But we love toilets that are using recycled water. And that's, again, the whole impetus for this program that we created in San Francisco for the on-site water recycling really is to take these water resources, to capture them, treat them, and reuse them to flush toilets and urinals, and as well as irrigation and cooling towers. We have a system in our building. It's currently undergoing maintenance, but what we plan to do is either take that concept even further in terms of innovation and treat water that's comparable to drinking water. So in our own headquarters is taking that wastewater, treating it to a standard that would be comparable to drinking. We won't drink that water in our building. What we're doing it as a test, as well as continuing research for new innovative technologies, as well as to engage the community to come learn about purified water, which is a whole nother innovation in terms of water and water management, which is taking wastewater and treating it so it's acceptable to drink. So the opportunities, there's many opportunities, and we at the utility are exploring all of these opportunities from micro scale, very small scales, looking at atmospheric water generation technologies, up to building scale treatment systems like Aaron is had in the buildings that he's operating treatment systems, to larger centralized infrastructure for recycled water for non-potable and potable, as well as looking at other kinds of innovations.
Okay, so I'm hearing cloud-based technologies, better monitoring, advanced leak detection, on-site water reuse, policies to mandate or require on-site reuse. Now, I want to talk about the impacts of that a little bit, specifically in San Francisco. So, Paula, you mentioned San Francisco has currently, San Franciscans use about 42 gallons per person per day. That not only is among the lowest in California, but as far as I know, that's among the lowest in the developed world. I think Sydney uses or Melbourne uses around 37 gallons per person per day. So just to put that in context, the statewide average in California is about 85 gallons per person per day. So San Francisco's really on the bleeding edge already, and that's using hetchy tap water to flush 99% of the toilets. So how much farther can we go on this? Can we get to, is there a future 10 years from now where we're using 29 gallons per person per day in the 20s? What kind of potential do you see out of this?
Well, right now, if you look at any of our planning documents, we're estimating 38 gallons per person per day. But we don't want a number to be stuck in people's heads, because I think that number precludes potential new innovations and new technologies that could come to market. So just for an example, we're starting to look at what recirculating shower heads, the possibility of recirculating clothes washers. So these appliances actually recycle the water within these units. So, when we talk about these numbers, it certainly doesn't include if these applications are safe for use in people's homes, or like at gyms, for example, recirculating shower heads. That certainly has a lot more potential to save water and to drive down that per capita. So our job's just never done. I think I've mentioned that we're constantly looking at the ability for new technologies to be deployed either at the utility, because we certainly have a lot of technologies we deploy for leaks in our distribution system, as well as how we can deploy those technologies in commercial and industrial and residential applications. We just have to make sure these new technologies are safe. And that they're protective of public health. So that's where this governance piece comes in. And I think, again, San Francisco has done a great job in terms of ensuring that our governance creates enabling innovation and not barriers to innovation.
And while I have you on the topic of what the city is doing, can you just briefly explain the ordinance that San Francisco passed? What buildings are affected, what they have to do, and is this being done anywhere else in the United States or anywhere else in the world for that matter?
Right. So San Francisco was the first community in the United States to adopt an ordinance to allow for the collection and treatment of alternative water sources, which means rainwater and stormwater, gray water, which is water from your clothes washers and your bathroom sinks and your showers, and then wastewater as well as condensate, which is vapor from air conditioning units. So we allow buildings to capture and treat this through an ordinance. Before that, there wasn't any regulations in place. We had proactive developers coming to us over decades saying, I want to install these kinds of systems in my building because I want to get LEED Platinum rating or be a green sustainable building. But they couldn't navigate. I went to a meeting once. There were probably 30 city employees in a meeting, and was like, there's no way anyone can navigate this kind of process going to different departments. So that's what we did. And that's what I mean by enabling policy is we actually developed an ordinance that streamlines the process and enables developers in the private sector to move forward. What the ordinance, it started voluntarily and now it's required. And what that requirement is, any new building over 100,000 square feet must install an on-site water treatment system to treat water to meet its toilet flushing and irrigation demands. And when I'm talking about buildings, I'm talking about it can be a commercial building, or it could be a multifamily building or residential building, or it could be mixed use, commercial and residential. And so that ordinance became mandatory in 2015, and we've made some amendments in 2021, learning from our programs over time. For example, now in multifamily, you need to use treated gray water for toilet flushing, irrigation, and for clothes washing. So again, we continue to learn and we continue to innovate along the way, which is why we say our work is never done. And we want to make sure that we're using water as efficiently as possible.
Great. And
Can I just give you a couple examples of some systems that are out there, just so to give people?
well, I was going to ask Aaron to give you some examples.
You can ask Aaron.
Aaron, you are the benefit, or your company is really, it's a San Francisco-based company founded here in San Francisco. You've got this policy happening in your own backyard that happens in no other cities. How has this requirement and the streamlining worked out for Epic Cleantec?
Well, without the policies, there wouldn't be an Epic Cleantec. Let me just say, I think we've talked a little bit about how well San Francisco does when it comes to water conservation, per capita usage, how well, how forward-thinking the policies are. I mean, kudos to the SFPUC and Paula, because it's pretty unusual. I mean, I travel all around the world. We are the gold standard for a water wastewater utility. So don't take that for, I'm born and raised here in San Francisco, so I'm always going to trumpet anything that San Francisco is doing really, really well. So thank you to Paula and the team at SFPUC, because again, we wouldn't exist as a company, but beyond just San Francisco, it's enabled a lot more communities to really explore water reuse. Water, and again, I referenced it at the outset, but I come from outside of the water wastewater sector. I used to say I was new, but I think I got to stop saying that line because it's almost 10 years now. But, I think we live in what I like to call a flush and forget society. Through the marvel of modern engineering that is our water wastewater infrastructure, it's not something we ever really have to think about until something goes wrong. I mean, we put our pipes and our infrastructure under our streets, very literally out of sight, out of mind. And I think for the vast majority of people, it's not something they ever have to think about. So all of a sudden, when you start talking about recycling wastewater in buildings, it makes people uncomfortable because it's not a topic. We work with some of the most sophisticated real estate developers in the world who are building billion-dollar projects. They don't know the first thing about wastewater treatment, biological treatment. So there's a big education step that has to happen. So these types of enabling policies, actually getting these first systems up and running, allows people to come and see it. They can see it, smell it, touch the systems. I mean, all of that is just so helpful to make sense of a topic that is otherwise pretty unfamiliar to folks. So, we've taken the playbook that San Francisco has developed, and we're taking it to new cities. I mean, we're going to be the first company deploying systems into San Jose, California, into San Diego, California, into several other states where this hasn't happened. Even though they don't have policies that are as far reaching as San Francisco's, they've basically said, okay, San Francisco's doing it. There's dozens of projects that are going to be incorporating this. We feel comfortable doing it. And by the way, Austin, Texas is going to have a program mandatory by the end of this year. Hawaii is developing regulations. LA has water recycling mandates. New York City has a program, and there's more and more cities and states adopting it. And in many ways, San Francisco was sort of was the starting point for what I like to call a water reuse revolution.
And just, could I just add to that? Thank you. I actually chair a national collaborative, getting to Aaron's point. So we have 15 states that are participating in on-site water recycling regulations and oversight management. So everything we've learned here, we share. It's a peer-to-peer forum as well as policies. And it's just really important that we share what we learn here with other communities that are struggling with water challenges, again, whether it's Hawaii or New York City or Minnesota, for example. And it just had the state of Ohio join. I'm not sure if we think state of Ohio has water challenges, but they do. And they want to know and learn about on-site water recycling. A lot of data centers are coming in. And so there's all of this work that's happening, and we are happy to be part of that effort. And just to give a couple examples, because you didn't give examples of your projects. Well, I talk about all systems and not just Epic Clean Systems, but we have systems at Chase Center, 1550 Mission, 49 South Van Ness. That's a city building. Sorry, I know them by addresses, but so we have just different. Exploratorium has a system. There's multiple different kinds of systems. Anchor Brewing, when they were operating, had an on-site water treatment system. So there's different kinds of applications and different kinds of buildings and settings. Mission Rock will have a district black water treatment system when they're online. And so we've got 45 permitted systems. So I could go on, but I'm not.
This might be an overreach in testing the numbers on command that you have, but do you know how many gallons a day are being saved through those 45 permitted
Yes.
projects?
So we have a water budget, we have a water calculator, and we actually ask for estimated savings, and we track them. Voluntary projects, mandatory projects, we track all of that. So there's a lot of tracking going on. There's also challenges and hiccups with occupancy, COVID. So, there's been changes through what we predicted versus what's happened and all of that. So we keep our eye on all of that work.
I mean, just for scale, just between 4 of our systems, all of which will be online by the end of this year, we were looking at savings somewhere around 10 million gallons per year.
That's great. What a huge impact. So for cities in California and elsewhere who listen to this and they want to learn about what's happened in San Francisco, Paula, are you the person for them to reach out to at SFPUC?
Sure, but I have many fantastic colleagues that I work with. One is in the audience today, Manisha Katari. So yes, we have lots to share with our staff. So please reach out.
Okay, great. Apologies in advance for your inbox and what I just did. Will, I want to talk to you for a second about Amazon Web Services and the role that it can play outsized of its impact on the watershed. So, California non-farm businesses, all the offices, all the refineries, all the campuses, they use about 10% of water in California. So a relatively small part, significant part, but relatively small part. So what role and what kind of impact can the lessons from a single company have for the broader water ecosystem, either as an inspiration to other companies, or what impacts do you see AWS having in the broader data center world? Maybe you're already seeing that.
Yeah, I think there are some that are specific to the data center world, and then some that can apply to other sectors of the economy as well. So within the data centers, I think we want to model how to be the most water efficient data center operator out there, including through how we're using treatment to recycle water on site within our system, the cloud technologies that we use to monitor and continue to refine our water use and tracking and eliminating waste. So that one's kind of specific, but we want to continue to improve that and be a model for others to show how we can make that improvement, because there are data centers out there that use a lot more water and they don't need to. Second, there are a couple other parts of our program where I think we're doing some innovative work that can be a model for others. One is water reuse, not on the on-site system, but we're really interested. We do reuse water on our sites and within our data centers. But we don't need to be using potable water for the water that we're bringing in to begin with to cool our data centers. We can safely use treated water through a purple pipe system, centralized water recycling system. And we started thinking, okay, we're actually willing to spend more money to bring in recycled water because it's a more resilient, drought-proof supply. Even during drought, people make wastewater. And so there's benefit to having that. So we started by thinking, okay, how do we connect as many of our data centers to recycled water as possible as a source? But then there are certain times when that just doesn't make sense. We may be far from the treatment plant, and we may be a pretty small user overall. So now we're starting to think, well, maybe we need to create a recycled water credit system where we can buy the environmental attributes of the recycled water. And that allows the budget that we have behind our water positive program to help support development of recycled water in the community where it makes the most sense. We want to find the largest water users that aren't using recycled water closest to the source of that recycled water and help support that. So we're flexible in that thinking, but we really we specifically integrated recycled water into the program because we think getting more communities and putting some of our resources behind building out those systems is the right way to build more resilient water supply systems. And then the last thing is just within what we call our replenishment portfolio. Those are the projects where we go, restore watersheds, expand water access. We have a unique kind of capital available there. We can do some projects that maybe are using less proven technologies or less proven the key innovations in business model, financing model, and technology, where we can go try those out and help elevate those innovations that are going to help drive change across the water sector. So we don't want to invest in projects that are just going to, check a box, say, great, pat us on the back for doing a good job with our program. We want to really help elevate those innovations that are going to drive broader change within the sector. So I think in a few different ways, hopefully we're making some bets on the key innovations that are going to create solutions to the water challenges we're facing.
Great to hear. And I want to know more about, now we'll ask everybody here on what some of the key challenges that you are facing in trying to achieve your goals. Water is one of the most highly regulated fields and industries that there are, obviously for good reason. Clean drinking water is critically important. It's important that voters and consumers have confidence that the water that they're getting from their taps is healthy. So I'd like you to, particularly, we'll start with you, because what you just mentioned, having impact beyond your scope, your direct scope, a credit system that helps spread and leverage your impact broader into bigger areas throughout the watershed, into other communities. That's, to me, just screams regulatory nightmare. I want to hear what you have to think about it, what you would say about it. And I also want to ask members of the audience to think of some questions. We'll do another 1 or 2 questions here, and then I'll turn it to you to see if you have any questions for our panelists. But Will, what are the big obstacles that you're facing?
Yeah, and just to be clear, all the projects that we're investing in, work within existing regulatory system. So when we're helping to support build out of recycled water systems, those are regulated systems. We're not changing anything about that. We're asking, how can we help bring, additional capital to support build out of those systems? The obstacles, it depends on what type of project we're talking about. We would love to use recycled water at every single data center that we build for cooling our data centers. In a lot of places where those systems exist, we're already using recycled water. But in a lot of places, the community may not have yet made the investment in upgrading the treatment to the point where you can reuse the water, or building out the distribution system. And we go to them sometimes and say, all right, how do we do this? How do we make it happen? We're willing to help invest in this. Things just take a long time in public infrastructure. And if you're building pipelines through, the South Bay to get to your data center, that is a complex process. So there is kind of just the realities of building infrastructure, the cost of that, the bureaucratic and other obstacles that are in the way, and just the utilities that SFPUC, obviously a leader in so many ways, but innovation is not equally distributed throughout the country on those types of innovations and in the investments that they've made in and water recycling. And so not all water utilities are nimble enough, ready to have those conversations, and just the timelines. We need solutions to a lot of these problems. If not today, if not, we need them soon. We probably already need to have done them some years ago. And so the pace of innovation can sometimes be an obstacle. And so we're picking the we picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and then we're continuing to think of ways that we can help drive that innovation and accelerate the pace of change.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about the barriers that you see that are preventing you from achieving your dream of water sustainability.
So, I mean, I come back a lot to just education. I think we have a population that probably doesn't know enough about how our water and wastewater systems work. And I think, again, that's changing. But that's going to be a big one. It's not just the general population. I mean, it's, again, even some of the folks we work with, really sophisticated building owners and developers, contractors, engineers, sustainability experts. This is kind of a new world. You know, I often like to say what's happening now in water, and again, I'm kind of speaking with what we do with this whole notion of decentralized water. It's kind of like what happened with the energy world 15 years ago, with the transition from just a sole reliance on big centralized energy infrastructure, then moving to solar, wind, hydro, some of the things I mentioned earlier. So there's definitely an education component, but another big challenge, especially when it comes to doing things like water recycling, is that water is not priced very high. The price of water is very low. And so sometimes it is difficult to justify the investment in these types of technologies because the payback can sometimes be, 10, 15, 20 years for projects that are smaller. It's the reason why so much investment in water infrastructure has been done on the centralized level, because you have economies of scale if you're building a large plant versus a bunch of smaller treatment systems. So that's definitely a challenge. And look, I used to live in Israel. Israel, in many respects, a world leader when it comes to water. Israel as a nation recycles 90% of its wastewater. 90% of all the wastewater it produces largely goes to things like ag. The second best country in the world when it comes to water recycling is Spain, I think hovering in the 30%. It's a pretty big delta. And I think the US, correct me if I'm wrong, I think sub 10%.
California is 5%.
Okay, so sub 10%, captured it. Which on the one hand, not great, but on the other hand, there's just a lot of room for improvement. But there are challenges. I mean, the pricing regulations are challenging. Not everywhere is San Francisco. So there are places where we go where we are not welcome, not because it's not a good solution, but maybe the utility doesn't have the staff to be able to run a water recycling program like San Francisco has, or LA has, or New York has. So there's a lot of different challenges, but what I will say is that there's a lot of just really exciting momentum. When you kind of coming back to water innovation, when I entered this industry 10 years ago, this whole notion of water innovation was, and I'm talking about in the corporate world, was kind of just a term that was bandied around. Now, when you look at the amount of water startups that are starting up, water accelerators, incubators that are fostering innovation, there's just an explosive growth. And I think when you come to the broad climate tech discussion, so much of the focus is on energy. I mean, I think by last time I saw, like 50% more federal R&D investment going into energy than in water. We are not as popular for some reason, which is weird because water is amazing. But again, all that is changing.
Can't make beer with energy. Reference to Aaron and Epic Cleantec made a beer with their recycled water. I've had it. It's very good. If we didn't have a morning event, maybe we would have brought some.
Chat with me after.
Yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about water use efficiency and conservation and the role that the utility can play in encouraging that, as well as encouraging new innovations through new governance models and again, working with the private sector and the community as a whole. I think that when we think about what more we need to do, we'll continue on all those fronts because we always lead with water conservation and water use efficiency. But we believe we're going to have to augment our water supplies with new water supplies, such as purified water, We are looking at a number of projects. Manisha is leading that effort, who's here today. We have 6 projects, major capital projects that we're looking at to produce, and this is more on a centralized scale, not a decentralized like in building. So those water supplies are certainly going to be important for us and to serve our customers, especially during drought. But with that is going to come a high price tag for those new water supplies. And so one of our biggest challenges, aside from accepting new water supplies such as purified water, accepting that and embracing that as a new water supply, is affordability. And we're very concerned about affordability. Some of these projects are hundreds of millions of dollars, so they're very significant investments, which again, why we always want to reduce the amount of water that we need to produce through water conservation and water use efficiency. If we need and use less water, we don't have to produce as much new water supplies. But affordability is a challenge. We want to make sure, even in some perspectives, people think our water rates are too low, but for some communities, they're already too high now. And so we have to think about affordability. We have to think about that as we move forward. We have to think of alternative programs to help our customers manage their water and wastewater bills.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and that, Aaron, you mentioned the return on investment. So let's talk about price signals for a minute. For a long time, you mentioned, Aaron, a lot of the VC money has been going into energy innovation companies because energy is expensive. And so the return on investment is quick. Water has historically been very low. I think water startups make up less than 1% of all VC capital in the United States. Or that was a few years ago. Maybe it's up now. But over the last 10 years, water prices have been creeping up. And in cities across California, you're seeing places that the cost of water has doubled, in some cases tripled in just a decade, as companies are, investing in new supply like desalination in San Diego, or just refurbishing and reinvesting in legacy systems like in San Francisco. So can you talk a little bit about, this new rush to invest in water technology and the role that the increasing price signals are having? And maybe, Will, I'll start with you. Amazon's been pouring a lot in this. How much do the price signals and cost savings play in that?
So we're a global company, so there's a lot of different price structures out there for utilities. So oftentimes, just the volumetric rate that you get charged for how many gallons you use may be a relatively low price signal. But there are other charges too. There's connection fees, and in some cases, water utilities have decided they really want to incentivize recycled water use, for example. So you may be able to save 50% of your connection fee by using recycled water instead of potable water. And so in some cases, there are strong price signals that incentivize you to use water differently than you otherwise would. We've kind of added our own price signal on top of that, though, and said, we're willing to spend additional money to make sure that we're operating sustainably with regard to water. So we're willing to pay more for recycled water. We're willing to invest in these replenishment projects to kind of augment that and make sure that we're creating a system of economics internally that's going to incentivize us to operate sustainably. And because, water may be cheap, but it is, for so many things, such a central and important input that if it's not there, it's a much bigger deal than the water than the volumetric rate that you're paying. So if we're using water for cooling a data centers have to be up and running, 99.9999% of the time, right? Reliability is one of the key challenges. And so if there's a threat to that water supply, it's just super important for us to make sure that we're investing in the sources and infrastructure that are going to be reliable. So I think there are other ways of either through other types of rates and parts of the rate structure, or the ways that we're incentivizing ourselves to invest more sustainably, and just being aware of the operational risk of what happens when water is not there. All of those add up to making us really care about water in a deep way that goes beyond just that, dollar per gallon.
Yeah, and look, on the investor perspective, we talked to a lot of investors. Some of them are investors in our company. I mean, they're just looking at the macro trends. Some of them I mentioned before, but it's just pure supply and demand. They're sort of seeing the stars align that we simply need to do things differently. When you look at the infrastructure we have in this nation, much of it put in 30 to 100 years ago, a lot of that is well past its shelf life. It needs to be repaired. And I think there's a lot of numbers thrown out around how much we need to be spending as a country over the next 20, 25 years. But one number I've heard is $1 trillion to overhaul all of our water, wastewater infrastructure. If we continue to just exclusively build the way we have, of just a sole reliance on large centralized infrastructure, we're never going to be able to keep up. I think investors are looking at that and they're starting to get more excited about water because, again, water is a strange thing where it's omnipresent in our lives. It touches literally everything we do. We are largely water. But, I think people associate it with just cooking, cleaning, what they see every single day, but we need water to grow our food. We need water, obviously, to cool our data centers, to power the technology that all of us use. That allows me to check on my dog's drinking habits during the day. Water is used to produce the electric vehicles that we need on the roads. Water is needed to produce the chips, the semiconductors that we need to power all of our technology. And so I think that's what investors are seeing. But I think beyond just the return on the investment, there's other intangibles that I think are very cool. And I'll give one example, which is that recently we had a visit. One of our buildings is a 40-story high-rise in downtown San Francisco called the 1550 building, 550 apartments. We're recycling about 2.5 million gallons a year. So we had a visit from CNBC, and we're walking through the hallways of the building, and the producer just kind of grabs one of the leasing agents in this building. And they said, "What do you think about this water recycling system?" And they said, "Oh, we love it." He said, "It's actually one of the top selling tools we have for prospective residents in this building." And you're thinking, like, why would that possibly be? And it's because people, especially here in California, we drive down the streets and up the highways every single day, and we see signs saying drought, conserve every drop. We go to restaurants and we see little placards that say, we're only going to provide water if you ask for it. So people are just being inundated all the time that we have a big problem. And a lot of people, whether it's with water or the climate challenge in general, they kind of feel hopeless sometimes. Like, what can I as an individual do? All of a sudden, just by virtue of being in this building, you're kind of doing your part. And again, when it comes to green buildings, I think 10, 15 years ago, it was a nice thing to do to have a green building. Now it's just driven by the market. It's driven by regulation. If you don't have a green building, good luck getting great tenants to live there or residents. So I think beyond just the ROI, there's a lot of other things that are being tapped into.
Okay. I'm just going to go quickly because I know we're getting on time, but so our rates are set on cost of service. So what that means is how much does it cost us to deliver water to our customers? So it's not like an arbitrary figure that we pick. We're regulated in terms of how we set our rates, and we have a very comprehensive rate study that we do before we set our rates. So it's a very sophisticated process. Our bills have gone up. I think folks that lived in San Francisco, like I did in 2002, there was a ballot measure about our water system improvement program. At that time, it was $3.2 billion. 1/3 of that paid by San Franciscans, the other 2/3 by our wholesale customers. Our voters, at that time had to go to the voters to say, are you willing to invest in our infrastructure, our water infrastructure from here all the way up to Hetch Hetchy in terms of rebuilding pipelines and reservoirs and tanks? And the voters said, yes, we want that investment, knowing at the same time that their bills are going to triple over time. So, there is the fact that we do have to raise rates to pay back the bonds that we took out for the investments. But also, as I mentioned, as we think about the future and these new alternative water supplies that we need to develop, we are thinking very carefully about affordability and how we can manage those future rates as we go forward.
Great. And I know the time is out. Do we have time for a question, Rufus? We got one in the audience. We got one hand. I can't say no. Oh, okay. Here. We'll do one question and then we'll wrap it up. We got started a few minutes late, so.
How many people are familiar with RHNA, Regional Housing Numbers Assessment? All right. How many living units are being assessed to San Francisco? Okay. And I just like to, ask one more thing. Because that puts a definite strain on all your jobs up there, if the governor says you need 244,000 new living units, is he cognizant of water infrastructure and what's needed to add to it?
I don't want to comment on the governor because I feel like that's out of my league, but I would have to say this is exactly the reason why we have this on-site water recycling program, which is for new development and new buildings. When we look at our future water demands, we expect most of the increased demand for water coming from multifamily buildings that are going to be built in the future of San Francisco as a result of new housing. This ordinance requires them to install these on-site water treatment systems to reduce the amount of potable water. So we feel like we're at least targeting the right issue in terms of new development in San Francisco by requiring these on-site water treatment systems.
Great. And to answer your question also in a slightly different way, and to clarify for the audience, the question mentioned RHNA, which is the acronym, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. It's the state mandate to every community in California to how many homes need to be built in the next 8 years. And the answer is yes, the SFPUC does incorporate the RHNA obligations in its forecasting, as do other cities throughout the Bay Area and presumably the rest of California. So it is one of the inputs. With that, I have to bring this to a close. For everyone here in the audience in the room, please give our panelists a hand. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming to the Klamath. And with that, I hope everyone has a great Friday and a fantastic weekend. Take care.